My wife's movie club watched Becket. A quick summary of the story of Becket is King Henry II and his best friend and advisor, Becket, Thomas Becket, work together to run the kingdom. Becket is the wisest man in the kingdom, and he fulfills his duty with extreme efficiency and competence. The king makes him Lord Chancellor, where he expands the kingdom and the revenues for the king. Becket enacts taxes on the church, that's the Roman Catholic Church, at the request of the king. And when the archbishop dies, Henry II sees an opportunity. He appoints Becket as the Archbishop of England, thinking that this will give him an ally in the church and he'll be able to get rid of all the separation. Becket fulfills the role of archbishop, but without loyalty to the king, and as a result, they become rivals. The archbishop, Becket, attempts to bolster and expand the power of the archbishop position and the church, and the king attempts to rid the kingdom of the injustice based on the position in the clergy, and Becket is killed and the king is whipped, and that's essentially the movie. One of the most interesting parts of this movie is that the movie shows us the immoral, inconsiderate, boisterous, and drunken nature of King Henry II. And Becket is his wise, efficient, patient, and competent friend. While it is inferred and suggested that Becket is a womanizer and heathen, with and like the king, the film doesn't really show this. Instead, it shows a dutiful friend / servant to the king, who is present for his debauchery but is not completely comfortable with it. This same friend later defies the king, challenges his authority, and threatens to excommunicate him for not bowing to the authority of the church. So the biggest question in Becket, at least for me, is one of the motivations. What is driving these two men? It may be the most interesting, intriguing, and confusing question in the film. What is the motivation? Is it fear? Well, the film seems to show the king's power is limited to the obedience of the noblemen and their strongholds. He seems to have free reign over the peasant Saxon race. The movie portrays Becket as a Saxon, and he might be afraid of what happens to him if he falls out of favor with the king. This may explain why he's able to change his allegiance once he's out from under control of the king and under the protection of the church. Then he can openly defy the nobility and the king. Or is it ambition or power? The film does not give this motivation credence and actively tries to prove that it is not his ambition that drives him. He is ever subservient to the king. He is surprised by his appointment to Lord Chancellor and begs the king not to do this when told he will be made the Archbishop of England. The real history may be different, but in the film, they're telling us that he is not power-hungry or ambitious. Okay, so what is his motivation? Is it care for others? We do see Becket troubled by the king's behaviors towards others. He attempts to save a peasant girl from the king's lust. He gives mercy to an attempted assassin monk. He sells all he has and gives to the poor, even as the clergy and nobility see this only as a political theater. So maybe he is motivated by helping others. Yet he does nothing to save Gwendolen from the king, and when he becomes archbishop, he excommunicates and threatens excommunication without hesitation, not specifically for sin, except for the one for the murder, but for not bowing to his power. That hardly seems like care for others. Okay, so could his motivation be revenge? The film does make a very clear plot line that Becket is hated, mistreated, and an outcast for the society he's in, pretty much because he is a Saxon. The film develops a race war, if you will, a narrative between those of Normandy, who are the nobles, and the Saxons, who were conquered by these Normans. The peasant girl who was saved from the king and the murderous monk were both Saxons. All the good he does, both before and after being the archbishop, is towards the Saxons, and the excommunication and defiance is towards the Normans. Becket says that his motivation is aesthetics, meaning he does it because it looks good. So, is it all for show? And if that's the case, then it is political theater. The problem with this is, who does it look right to? So he acts right for the position he is in, I would suppose. Meaning he's good for the king when he's with the king, he's good for the church when he's in the church. Now, it obviously could be a combination of several of these motivations because that would be realistic. People don't just have one thing, they usually have many. But I think the major motivation is success. Success is the greatest source of motivation, and success leads to more success. Fear is not long-lasting. It creates despair. Revenge is empty and poisons the person who keeps it. Wealth and power are substantial, but they know no satisfaction. They will ever be in want of more. The more you want something, the more you're willing to do to get it. However, with success, depending on how it's measured, there is a moral feedback loop. Honest and hard work resulting in success will be the sweetest satisfaction, and it will keep you motivated and happy. My conclusion is that Beckett's motives are unclear, but I like to think that he is motivated by being the best at whatever he's doing, by being successful, and taking each role seriously and filling that position the best he can. The great conflict of the historical story and the story in the film is about the adjudication of the law. A priest has been found guilty of violating a young woman. He is in jail. The church demands his release to their custody because he is a clergy and not subject to the normal law. The king's authority is being questioned. While the decision has not been completely resolved, this priest attempts to escape from prison and a nobleman kills him. Becket, as the archbishop, excommunicates the nobleman who killed the priest. That's the priest who violated that young woman. Why does he do this? It's because he killed a priest. It's the clergy that he's trying to protect. However, the nobleman was acting under the authority of the king, and in that regard, he has done nothing wrong. He doesn't deserve excommunication or legal action. The excommunication is Beckett's way of showing his contempt for the king's authority. It's a way of bolstering his own power. It is a power play where he is subverting the king's authority, and the king does see it as a direct challenge to the nobleman and his own kingly authority. So he responds in according to the legal process from which Becket flees the country. The storyline is added to this film to illustrate the conflict between the church and the kingdom. This is a reference to the constitutions of Clarendon. Historically, there were 16 constitutions to lessen the clergy's independence and connection with Rome. And so historically, Becket had expressed his support of those ideas, but refused to sign the documents, and this caused a great rift. In the movie, there are 10 articles, they say, of which Becket approves of 9 of them, but refuses the one that says that his guys will be, punished for the law. Additional to this, a young Saxon monk is illustrated in the story of how the clergy are getting away with crime. He commits an attempted murder without any justice. From the king's perspective, there should be just one set of rules, one law. But the church has another idea, that the clergy aren't subject to those things. Now, parallel that to your own life. In this country, the caste system that you live under is not as openly proud about the caste system like England is. Politicians, for example, versus you, they have their own little justice systems. It's not exactly parallel to church and state like we see in the Becket film, but it's more like king and peasant. For example, if you are convicted of insider trading, you will go to jail, just like Martha Stewart did. But if a politician is convicted or found out to be an insider trading, they may get a verbal warning, they may get scolded, but sometimes not even that. And that is the extent. There's 2 different systems. So you can kind of compare, is that just, is that fair? Well, that's kind of what the king is making an argument for, that there should just be the one system. So, the king who ordered the imprisonment and the rules associated with escaping the prisoners. To the king, this is the legal right belonging to the nobleman that killed him. To excommunicate him and previously demand that the priest be handed over to the church is to defy the king. It's to question his authority. It's to question the whole system of where he's getting his power from. In my opinion, this illustration is somewhat flawed because it just really doesn't feel like a big deal. There is such an easy solution, right? The priest who assaulted the girl is turned over to the church, and then he would be defrocked. Then the king would be able to punish him according to his own law because, he is no longer under the protection of the clergy status. Everybody wins with this. My opinion is that both laws can exist together. Everyone answers to the law of the land and the law of the church. But any provision that a clergyman could use to avoid justice within the secular courts, claiming that they are only to be tried by the ecclesiastical courts, is not justice. The last point I wanted to make about the movie Becket was the historical accuracy of the historical drama. As it turns out, the play the movie is based on was written with a misconception about Beckett's heritage. The play and the film assert that he is a Saxon and that this is why he was hated and the way he was treated and some of the motivations that come in later in the play and the movie. However, Thomas Becket was of Normandy and he was not a Saxon in real history. The author did find out that Becket was not a Saxon before he released his play, which turned into the movie, but he decided not to change it because it would be too much work. So, most of the underlying plot lines, the motivations for revenge, the other social justice messages are like regular social justice. They're just not based in reality. This is another reason why social justice almost never is real justice. It is all based on the perception of injustice, outward appearances only, instead of true understanding of the conditions and the causes for what we're finding. In summary, I really enjoyed this film despite some of the distractions about the Saxon anger, their poor treatment, and the lack of response from either the king or the church. There are also clear illustrations of corruption of those in power and their moral decay that's not always fun to watch. The movie is a bit one-sided in that it glorifies Becket and insults the king. I mean, it is called Becket after all, not Harry and Thomas. This 1964 film, Becket, is a good movie. The acting is superb, the setting and the costuming are perfect. The drama is compelling, complex, and thought-provoking. I hope you enjoyed this review and this movie. I'm also curious about what you thought about the movie. Let me know. Thanks.
Will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest?